Good morning, guys. My name is David Jaroszewski, and today I'm going to be speaking about what a state curriculum is, the history behind a curriculum, how it's used in schools, how it's changed in my lifetime personally, and what is the overall purpose of teachers and curriculum in school and how it affects the learning of students. So, let me go down real quick. So essentially, a curriculum is the overall educational standards, courses, lessons, the practices. It's the content that's taught in school. So what is each kid learning throughout the day, and it varies by state to state, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. There are many stakeholders in the development and creation and construction of a curriculum. There's on the very fundamental level, there's obviously teachers who are working in the classroom, there's the principal who's working at the school, but there's also the local school boards, state legislators, other educational administrators who work throughout the state. Also, there's special interest groups that play a key part and putting in certain content standards that they feel that each student should learn. So the content standards in Texas and California can vary a lot. So there's a lot of people that have input into developing this curriculum. So for thousands of years, the main part of curriculum was the apprenticeship program. So it existed for thousands of years. I'm just going to focus on modern history for like the 17 and 1800s. Um, Occupations like carpenters, blacksmiths, masons, textile workers, priests, any job where a worker learned underneath someone who had mastered a specific skill or set of skills, they would learn directly from them. So they would be modeling directly that skill for them. So you can see on the right, that's a young blacksmith. I believe that's in the early Industrial Revolution, the first Industrial Revolution in the early 19th century. And that's how it existed for hundreds of years. And then you move along to the early 1900s with the second Industrial Revolution, and this really affected how education was viewed. It made education free. It improved the accessibility of education for all children because now it's funded by states and local governments. So it wasn't just rich, upper class kids who were getting an education, it was everyone. So it really improved the accessibility. Kids were learning mostly agricultural practices because many people at that time were farmers. With the passage of the Smith-Hughes Act in 1917, it started funding these vocational based learning occupations and jobs, which we learned about last fall and over the summer with work based learning programs and all that fun stuff. In the 1930s, curriculum made a drastic change because at that time, many people were laid off. A quarter of the country was unemployed, but specifically kids between, in one of the readings you had us reading in Module 1, kids between 18 and 24, I believe, almost 100% were unemployed. So the skills that they learned in high school weren't suiting them for this environment to get a job. So essentially, we had failed our kids. We didn't give them the tools necessary to be successful outside of the classroom. And that's the whole point of learning in school is to prepare them for life after school. And if we're not giving them those tools and those skills and that knowledge to be successful outside of school, then we're failing them. So this is when our idea of curriculum began to change. We, especially after World War II, we put a greater emphasis on inquiry-based learning. So beforehand, it was just, rote memorization, flipping through note cards essentially, just memorizing everything. So the content wasn't really relevant. It was boring. It was unengaging. But now with this inquiry-based learning approach, it put the learning in the hands of each student. So, for example, in a science classroom, each student would play the role of a scientist. They wouldn't have to just memorize the periodic table. They would actually become a scientist, create their own hypothesis, carry out experiments. Each school had laboratories and science equipment now where they could carry out these hands-on projects. So these kids could actually learn with their hands and work on projects that actually made sense. And then finally, in the early 2000s, there was a renewed focus on math and science. Obviously, the technological revolution is just taking off at this time. So anything with system-based learning, computers, all of those skills are really fundamental to being successful today. So, curriculum, how it's changed in my lifetime is there's been a greater emphasis on test taking skills and standardized testing. So, in high school, you have to take classes like the ACT, the SAT subject tests, STAR testing, AP tests. There's a greater emphasis on that. There's also been an increased use of technology in the classroom with Chromebooks, MacBooks, Promethean boards, students creating screencasts like I am right now, creating podcasts, PowerPoint slides, Google slides. The list goes on and on. Each student is obviously carrying around an iPhone or an Android now, so they're carrying around their own little computer. So technology is pervasive in every part of our life now. So it's important that we're teaching these kids how to use that efficiently and effectively. There's also been, like I mentioned before, a higher focus on math and science classes as well as English classes. Those have been the main focuses. And finally, there's been an increased use of accommodations differentiation for students in the classroom. I remember when I was in high school, it seemed like every person got the exact same assignment and took the exact same tests. But now we've, through legislation like IDEA and others, we're really putting a emphasis on making sure each student is given the right tools to be effective. So there's more equity in school instead of just equality. There's more equity for each student so they can feel like they can be successful inside as well as outside the classroom. And finally, what is the purpose of teaching and the purpose of schools overall? And for me, it's just to inspire and engender just this love of lifelong learning. We want to prepare them for a rapidly changing world in 2020, a rapidly changing world as well as job market. So specifically, some of the things we want to teach them is digital literacy. So anything computer skills, system-based learning, how to discern between fake and real information, how to cite sources, anything like that is really imperative to their success outside of school. Also, the soft skills of like oral literacy, collaboration, being able to work together in diverse situations and environments, overall social intelligence. This is like really important for them. And finally, on a more personal level for me, that's something that's really important is just creating kind and tolerant and compassionate students. I think that's something that's lacking in a lot of kids nowadays for a variety of reasons that I won't get into, but we're not, I feel like just kids have we just really need to like teach them to just be kinder and more tolerant and more compassionate to others and other students, regardless of who they are, where they come from. So that's just that kind of gets back to teaching from a culturally relevant perspective. So each student feels like they're heard and they're welcomed. And finally, that gets me to the last one is just a learning environment. I know it's the cliche in teaching now, but voice and choice, but really emphasizing their voice, empowering them to share their knowledge, where they're from, personal stories, who they are, their opinions, creating a more confident student, and also giving them choice, which means just like making a curriculum, teaching lessons, teaching them things that are relevant to them, giving them a choice on how to demonstrate knowledge. All that stuff is super important to them as a student.